right?
And authorizing the representation of such media according to the law of Ukraine. That's yet another option because our legislation is more relying upon the word represent or the representative office phenomena, but that's an old way because you understand that it happens according to the law of Ukraine on economic activity that was adopted by Ukrainian Soviet Socialistic Republic, and all the provisions were developed during the times of early Kuchma era, the end of 90s. So why are we considering it? Why? Because it influences different approaches to registration, and usually, since we've updated the media legislation, you know that we have a law on media recently adopted. It comes into force gradually, but the major part of it is already in effect. So what I'm trying to say that in compliance with the existing regulation, the creation of specific units, so they all fall under the competence of the Ministry of Economy, just in the way that it was seen in the Soviet Socialistic Republic. Any representative office of any foreign company, not specifically media, anything like Sony Corporation or IKEA, In the same way, the representative office of CNN or Al Jazeera or whatever, in my opinion, it's not quite right, because the specifics of operation of media is different. If a business company works to gain profit, in case of media, the key component is content that is being created and that subsequently influences the activities of a parent company that may be located abroad. So I personally was submitting my proposals to have all those things updated. For example, to establish a new government agency in charge of registrations. We have, for example, National Council on Broadcasting, which is in charge of all the media according to the new legislation, not like TV and radio before. It's called audiovisual media, so there is a full set. Or there is another agency involved, Ministry of Culture and Information Policy. So again, this is the introduction, but for the time being, as we act in compliance with the legislation that I've mentioned, we view media as an economic entity who comes here for the sake of gaining some profit, just like any other representative office of any company. So again, I'm considering two options. Like Maria mentioned during the introduction, we will talk today about the establishment of a representative office as a way to do it, a representative office as a separate unit. But there is another option. It will be different because this is a representative of a foreign legal entity, and in this case we're talking about Ukrainian legal entity. This is why please just remember that there are additional options. I don't think I'm unique in representing this, but basically somehow the media, they follow the first procedure. There is understanding of this procedure. I was advising the representatives of bigger media, and there were restrictions, and they were opening the same type of representative offices if in all of the in all other countries. So it was basically a branch of this office, and when they were facing it that there is another option, but for our head office it's gonna be surprising if we establish a legal entity in Ukraine. So just some of them followed that second procedure. So again, let's move on. That's pretty clear, right? So just in brief, it's the Ministry of Economy who is in charge of registration. It's called the Ministry of Economy. So, but in their iterations from year 1995, I think they changed their name 5 or 7 times. So for the time being, they're called the Ministry of Economy. The service provided by this ministry is called registration of a representative office of foreign economic entity in the area of media. So term of registration is 20 days. So the cost is about 2,500 hryvnia. Well, there is an interesting thing that was retained in the legislation. You see, in the brackets, there is 60 and 30. So 60 days and 30 base minimum. That's for the registration of the aggressor country. I cannot imagine what can be registered by the aggressor country here, but our legislation still contains those surprising conditions. So we're talking about the existing reality, and I communicated to you. So if we talk about foreign media, we usually don't mean Russian, and in this case it's 20 days at about 2500 hryvnias. So in the old provisions, they don't remove the old standards from our legislation. However, they add more and more layers. And previously it was saying that the cost of registration of representative office was around $2,000. So this is what remains in the old provisions. So what are we supposed to do for the registration? We submit an application. Application is made in a free form. We add supplementary documents and excerpts from trade register. They're called in a different way in different countries. What we call in our country an excerpt from a register that we get about our company. A certificate from the bank with which account is opened. So is the certificate from the bank which holds an account of the parent company. And it's interesting that we should identify where the head office of the company is. So those international trade relations, some large corporations, they have many representative offices all around the world. And they submit the information to Ukraine about the location of their head office, and there are certain criteria for for identification of the head office, like a place where the main economic activity is taking place and where the decision-making process is taking place. So basically the place of meeting of the board of the corporation, because if you're aware of the activity of the media, there may be a number of representative offices, like they may have a head office in America and big representative offices in Europe or Asia, and the staff will not always be from America, but that will be the staff from the representative offices that are closer to the occurring events, but the documents should be submitted from the head office again. So we're talking about the bank certificate and the excerpt from the register. And then there is a power of attorney issued to exercise the representative functions in Ukraine that lists all the authorizations in compliance with the requirements of the legislation of the country that issues such power of attorney. And as a result of such work, a result of submission, the proper set of paperwork is the certificate on registration of representative office. It means that the state of Ukraine has registered an office, a representative office of the media, and they produce the relevant certificate. Well, I think that you are going the presentation disseminated among you, so we don't talk, we don't cover everything with our conversation, because still I included the full list, the complete list. I don't like making any such documents short. This is why I'm presenting it to you in the way that it is. So first, the name of the foreign media, then the country of origin of the foreign media. So again, we should indicate the location of the head office there. Then location, we already mentioned it. Well, it's an interesting question about the website, contact telephone number, and electronic mail. And then there are some definitions that throw us back to year 1994. A city in which the representative office is being opened with specification of its future place of registration. So it's kind of surprising that you, at the moment of registration, you are already supposed to know what will be your location of your office. Well, it looks a little bit archaic, but in any case, you're supposed to know that such requirement exists. If there are branches planned to be opened, then you should know that you should specify the cities they will be opened at, then the number of foreign citizens that are going to work in a representative office. So it doesn't say the approximate number, it says the specific number, and I'm just communicating this information to you as it's set forth in our legislation. So again, the number of foreign citizens that are going to work in a representative office, then the date of establishment, then the legal form of foreign economic entity, of foreign company. Well, you see, it's all created not for media. All the regulations are not created for media. They are created to regulate the companies, the businesses. I don't know, some trade companies, business companies, then number of employees of foreign company. And it's interesting to me how a corporation with 80, say, representative offices all around the world will submit this information to Ukrainian government, because the number of their employees may change even within a day. Well, the name of the bank is clear, the account number is clear, the area of activity is clear, and the purpose of establishment, this is pretty clear. Well, you remember you have to submit the application in a free form, but it should contain the answers to those listed questions. So as long as it's a foreign entity, all of the documents, all the paperwork are supposed to be notarized at place of their issue. Also, they are supposed to be legalized from the country of its origin. Well, we have to check out what is the status of relations with that foreign country in terms of legalization of documents, because they differ from country to country. Then the Ukrainian translation is supposed to be presented, and every power of attorney that has been issued abroad, for example in United States, you are supposed to legalize it in Ukraine, you are supposed to translate it in Ukrainian language, and the signature of the interpreter is notarized as well. This procedure exists for all of the documents. So what's worth attention, that the documents that are submitted should have been issued from the place of origin at 6 months before the date of registration, the most. So in view of all of the bureaucratic procedures, you have to pay attention to this aspect, because it may serve as a legal reason to ask you to have this document repeatedly issued at the place of origin, because take into account the translation, legalization, and all of those bureaucratic procedures, they all take time. Well, after the registration of the documents, the details in the submitted documents are verified. There is also a surprising procedure. I don't remember whether I was digging so deep into details. So as the documents are being submitted, they are being verified, and then you get the account number where you have to pay to. And some may remember that back in 94, 95, $2,000 were a hell of an amount. The government was taking foreign entities cautiously, and if they were seeing that everything is fine, then they were asking for this registration fee to be paid. Now this fee is significantly decreased to the amount of approximately 2,500 hryvnia, which is roughly $70. So there is a check, there is a verification. If verification is completed, the certificate of registration is being issued. In case of some discrepancies, the legislation says that there may be discrepancies in form or content. Like talking about the form, for example, if you miss this 6-month term, if some of your documents were issued more than half a year before you have them submitted for registration, you will be kindly asked to update those documents. But there might be also questions to the content of the documents, so we have to understand it that, for example, the number of employees working in large corporations, well, that might be an issue in case your media is very large. So again, in case of discrepancy, you will be asked to rectify them. Well, who can obtain the certificate? The head of a representative office or a person authorized to do so? If we view it from the point of view of normal logic, there is certain violation, because before the registration there is no such a notion as a director. The director only appears after the entity is registered. And I hope that in this case, the person in whose name the power of attorney is issued is considered to be a director. And since such person can have a lot of workload, they can reassign some functions to other persons, because most likely those activities are exercised by some lawyers, counsels, legal advisors, and so on and so forth. So one way or another, I need to mention it that if we check thoroughly, it looks a little bit surprising. Like, how come there can be a director of a representative office if there is no representative office before it's registered, right? So after the issue of certificate, there are certain marks made in the government registers. Thereupon, after you have the certificate issued to you, after you fulfill the state registration, this certificate, it may serve as a reason for opening of accounts with the banks, also as a reason to appeal to custom authorities, because you may want to temporarily import some equipment. Because if we imagine such economic relations, that second procedure is different from the first one, because everything you've imported is the property of a foreign media company. In the second case, if you establish a legal entity, you have to import the equipment, you pass all the custom clearance procedures in it, and it becomes Ukrainian. So, and then in compliance with the legislation, if you have to exercise any other functions, you have the certificate, which serves you as a reason to interact with the government authorities and government agencies. Refusal. May there be refusal? Yes, as we've mentioned, the documents do not comply with the legislation of Ukraine in part of the requirements, like in case also if the details from the documents are or fraudulent nature. You see, this is a citation from the legislation. Well, quite an interesting provision here. So again, it may serve as a reason for refusal, but there are procedures of dispute in the refusal. So if you think that the Ministry of Economy committed a mistake, you may submit a complaint. So there are two procedures: administrative procedure and court procedure. So according to the administrative procedure, you submit it to the authority that exercises oversight over the activities of such entities, which is again the Ministry of Economy. Or you can also have that refusal disputed in court. Well, I've mentioned the term within which you have to submit your dispute. So administrative dispute 1 month and court dispute 6 months. So the procedure there is so interesting that it says that within a year, but not later than a month, starting from the date when you found out that you are being refused the registration of the media entity office. But again, don't confuse it. It says that this administrative dispute procedure is effective within a year, but within this year you have only 1 month after you find out. And you find it out as soon as you get a notification from the Ministry of Economy, and you're not going to have the whole year from that. You only have 1 month. But the procedure is pretty mild there. They will just ask you to rectify the discrepancies in the paperwork. So that's pretty much it. I guess let's get back to the beginning. As to the procedure in general, that's it. We have half an hour. Past Maria told us that we may have questions, or you may have questions or suggestions or comments in this regard. So if you have any, please go ahead. Like, my opinion, as I mentioned, is that our legislation is very archaic, and we to confirm it, there is a very small number of officially registered media, even no matter that Ukraine is a huge newsmaker within the last 2 years. Maybe a factor that is holding somebody back, but in my opinion, it's correct to exercise any activity in a legal way, in a legitimate way. So like I mentioned, legitimate way and blah blah. So why? Because with the beginning of the full-scale invasion, from the point of view of the management, it was taking prompt decisions and fulfilling everything just as quick as possible. But if we talk about proper import of vehicles, machinery, payment for payment of salaries, payment of wages, unfortunately now it's all in the gray zone, and it violates the Ukrainian law in the area of taxation. Well, we're not seeing any operation from the government so far, but we have to understand, if a person works for a foreign media and they are being paid here under the gray schemes, sooner or later it becomes clear. Then it's the matter of insurance and other things that I think that even in case of a requested vacation, the standards come into effect that to a certain extent protect the employees. They allow them to legally submit the documents for accreditation to the Ministry of Defense and many other things. So it's an important thing one way or another. So I urge everybody to pay attention to it. Now, if anybody has any questions or concerns, please go ahead and ask. My first question, my name is Oleg. So the economic entity that is supposed to exist to obtain the registration certificate, does the law clearly say what form of ownership it should be? Should it be a limited liability company or a civil company or a joint stock company? So, for example, a civil organization, can they be a act as a parental company of a representative office? Well, the second thing you said, the second thing, what did you mean? The registration of a legal entity. For example, there is a partner which is properly registered, and then they can just hand over their share to foreign institution. No, there are no restrictions. I understand your question. We should look at the legal form of ownership. Just pick the one that is the most convenient for your activity. Because for the civil organizations or the civil unions, because there are civil unions, civil organizations, non-profit unions, and so on and so forth, we have a very broad range of forms of ownership or legal forms. So there are no restrictions. You just have to check out what's the most convenient way for you. This is the matter of formal logic. You mentioned it properly, that the best form is the limited liability company. Our legislation is pretty flexible and easy in this regard. Only, well, one person can be a founder in our case according to our legislation. There are no additional requirements. So again, is the economic entity is the easiest way. You can pick the simplified taxation system that already gets you rid of excessive reporting. And again, I failed to mention that in my communications in interaction with the media who has representative offices, even if they are representative office, they still are responsible for submitting the reporting to Ukrainian government authorities and talking about, for example, the leaves, the post-Soviet leaves or business trips, and it all carries this post-Soviet burden, the post-Soviet heritage. And in media, for example, business trips is a normal thing. Like now, the main news are happening in the front lines, and in a sense of in a sense of complaints that we were getting, all those bureaucratic procedures, they take time. And I hope I've answered your question that even civil organization can be a parent company, but it can be a non-for-profit status, and you have to make sure that the organization doesn't get deprived of this status. So the registration of such company takes only 1 day, and in terms of money, it's measured in, like, I don't know, 1 day of work of a fixer if we have a meeting with fixers. So basically, yes, it looks just like this for a big media. It's called well, in legal language, it's called non-material approach. Some minor things that are not being paid attention to.
I did not understand at the beginning. You said that there were 3 options to. Correct me if I'm wrong. 3 options to open or to establish a representation for a foreign media.
Two. No, not 3. 2.
Well,
2
okay,
options.
I understood. The third one was to properly open an Ukrainian organization. Okay. Mm-hmm. You described the the one that understands that this media becomes an economic entity in Ukraine. And the first one was, as far as I understand, much easier. I mean, in terms of when you open a correspondency in a country, things, at least in Europe, as far as I know, I've been working in several countries, are much easier. There is no other way. The way that this few media...
The first one.
Yes.
It is a representative office.
Yes.
The second option, it's established Ukrainian... Підкажіть мені.
Legal entity. Opening a Ukrainian legal entity.
Thank you.
From Japan, do you know how many foreign media already registered in this way?
What kind of? First, second?
First and second, both. For
okay.
each, yeah. Already after this full-scale invasion, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Значить, дивіться.
Well, look, currently we had 2 representative offices, and it seems like a third one was opened recently. If we imagine the number of international media corporations, the offices of which exist here now in dozens, and within the latest period, only one was opened in compliance with the first procedure, and the first 2 were opened way before, even before the revolution of dignities. So they keep working for more than 10 years now, and only thanks to the fact that they got registered back then, that they still exist. They now say that they wouldn't like to undergo all the difficult procedure now. Well, under the second procedure, I know that there was one company that got registered just recently, just not to walk that more difficult path. So what they've done, they've did it through DIA application. They've registered a limited liability company with a minimum statutory capital, and they were doing it from abroad. Well, it was done by a Ukrainian because he had access to DIA as a citizen of Ukraine, and he was doing it from abroad. So, as I'm saying, due to administrative procedures, the media is getting like scared away. But we have to continue working on this. The first wave, when everybody has come to Ukraine and they wanted to produce the information product on a prompt basis, this wave is already subsiding, and only the most professional ones remain now. Those who don't only know how to get the information, but how to properly disseminate it and how to get benefits from it. Have I answered your question?
Not secret. Could you give me the name of the media that completed the register?
Це не секрет, це питання етичності.
Well, it's no secret, but it's a matter of ethics. I'm not calling the names of the customers or organizations who asked for my services. I can give you an example of any complications that might arise, but again, it's a matter of ethics and approach. So I'm using it always. I'm using this approach at all times, and I think it can be useful both for us and our listeners online. If you ask for advice and you get answers to your questions, well, nobody is going to reference you. The case may be interesting, but the names, the titles, well, it's something... How do I say it properly? Is the lawyer's secret, as it's called officially. I'm having another question. If we look at the second procedure, it says under the law of Ukraine, but I know that many organizations, they gravitate more to and appeal more to the English law. So isn't it completely impossible, or we should more thoroughly review the standards? No, Mr. Lek, that's about the approach. I apologize for what I understand. We have certain number of spectators watching us online. So dear friends, if you have any questions, please send them to Maria. So you are involved in our discussion. So the approach is way easier, like all the laws, like English law, or say Middle Eastern law, or United States law. It's all covered by the first procedures. So your key entity is the parent company established elsewhere. And now there is a huge demand, for example, for community broadcasters. They are the large broadcasters. For example, the national broadcaster of France is associated in compliance with the law of France. In Japan, in compliance with the law of Japan. In Britain, in compliance with the law of Britain. And when they get here, they have a separate unit in compliance with the first algorithm of our actions. So they have this separate unit of their company, and they appoint the director of that unit, the one that was mentioned there as a person who obtains the certificate. But again, it's not always a person who obtains a power of attorney to exercise the registration is the same person who is going to be the director of a representative office, because all those bureaucratic procedures are usually processed by other persons, not the ones that do the management functions here in Ukraine. Because one thing is registration and another thing is management of a media unit, because a media unit should be managed by a person who understands something about this, like how to create a media product, what is the number of employees necessary to be employed with the office. And administrative procedures is a whole different thing. They're like bureaucracy, right? As a rule, the foreign media, they work, for example, on rotation basis, so that different people undergo specific changes in compliance with their procedures, like enrich themselves with experience working in one country, then in another country. So this, what you mentioned about the English law, yeah, it works, but in case of the first procedure and the second algorithm, second procedure, is to create a Ukrainian legal entity, not a branch, but a legal entity that was established, and the sole owner and establisher is that company, that parent company. And in this case, there are just two legal companies, and one legal entity is an owner of another legal entity established in Ukraine, and their task is to represent the interests and to exercise collection, accumulation, and dissemination of information. I don't know, maybe translation and some other functions. It's just a little bit different way. And the activities of Ukrainian legal entities in Ukraine is regulated and is simplified. So we've passed all those procedures of simplification, at least on the registration phase. Well, the accounting is simplified too. Well, what I mean is that all of the government agencies are not going to exercise control over those representative offices. Well, they may, but compared to the situation that existed many years ago, the activities that existed in the 90s, along with the registration, comparing to the activities and registration that exist now, those are two completely different things. Back then, you had to have a number of people administering your business just to exercise some small activity. You had to have lawyers. You had to have accountants, brokers. Yeah, right. There was a crazy amount of requirements that was just sucking your money. Now everything is way better simplified, and those are the huge advantages. It's not a topic of our today's discussion, but you see the people who temporarily left abroad and they face such necessities as opening a bank account abroad. They are shocked. It takes them 2 months to open an account. In Ukraine, it takes hours to open an account with the bank. So in this sense, yeah, we have some advantages and we have to recognize them.
Right, as the taxes that one representation of one media should deal with in Ukraine, I mean.
Щодо оподаткування,
Well, talking about the taxation, the main taxation is generally is the payment of salaries. Since your parent company is abroad, their activities are being taxed in the country of their origin. Here in Ukraine, if you exercise any activity that produces some profits, in this case, you're supposed to pay income tax, the tax on that income. But in case of representative office, it usually does not generate any financial benefit, financial profit. It creates information product that is being sent abroad. And what's interesting also is that you don't broadcast from Ukraine. You hand over your media product somewhere to New York, Tokyo, Singapore, Paris, elsewhere. And there this product is being disseminated in accordance with all of the requirements that exist there. For example, representative office doesn't mean a Ukrainian broadcasting company that got a license. Your license stays at your country of origin. For example, BBC license is with BBC in London. There is BBC in Ukraine, but they broadcast in compliance with the license obtained in United Kingdom. So the key thing you should pay attention to is payment of salaries to the personnel working here. This is the easiest form. If you generate some additional profits here, it's supposed to be taxed here as well. And in our case, we don't have a simplified form of operation. If we talk about representative office, the first procedure, if we act under the second procedure as a Ukrainian legal entity, you can choose the simplified taxation form. And if there is a taxation, then the scheme of taxation will be simplified. We have a little bit of time, so talking about taxation, you have taken into account that in the second case, in the Ukrainian legal entity, if you work according to the simplified system, all the money that is coming to your account, they are taxed right away. So you lose 5% because the unified tax is 5%. If you work on general system, you have a balance between your income and expenditure, then your balance will be more or less zero, basically like all the money coming in, you just pay out salaries, you pay the unified tax, and that's pretty much it. Your work on taxation will be simplified. If you switch to simplified system, you will be losing 5%. Yes, it works like this, but again, it's not a hell of a loss if we look at the amounts paid to the workers of the representative offices of the foreign media in Ukraine. Well, if I may, just another question. So, if such legal entities, they only generate content, store it, hand it over, so without broadcasting. So yes, the representative office cannot do any broadcasting. Yeah, that's regulated. That's clear. But if a foreign media wants to establish a local broadcaster, they are going to establish it on the foundation of this representative office. No, that's not quite correct. If they want to establish a broadcaster, they have to go to the National Council on Television and Radio Broadcasting. They obtain the license depending on the type of broadcasting they want to do. If it's a licensed type of activity, so anyway, they have to establish a Ukrainian legal entities. Even no matter how we simplify the procedures and licensing procedures, like only the TV broadcasting is supposed to be licensed. If you're present on Ukrainian IPTV networks or OTT, if you are part of their services, you are not supposed to obtain a license, but you still have to get registered with the National Council for Broadcasting. Well, that's clear. Thank you. Dear friends, I see that we are kind of running out of time. If we have more questions, we still have a couple of minutes to discuss them. In case you have any questions, please go ahead and ask. Наскільки
Establish our company here in Ukraine, we have to contact with foreign, economic
Yeah.
Ministry of Economy, right?
Yeah.
And should we have contact to the Ministry of Minister обороны? Defense. Sorry, Ministry of Defense or Ministry of Culture?
For registration?
Yes, for registration.
No. No. It's not depend with these guys. Only Ministry of Economy.
Okay, thank you. So it's different.
Yeah.
Доброго дня, мене.
Good afternoon. My name is Sergey. I'm a fixer. It looks and sounds like there's nothing complicated about it. So my question is kind of abstract. Based on your experience, is it really like that? Is it really so quick and not complicated? You're asking about registration. Well, in your case, what do you mean, the registration? There are two procedures, or you mean in general? Well, in general, I have to tell you that the first procedure, sometimes people stumble upon the administrative procedures that hold them back. There were instances of this last summer last year. You may be remembering the freshly deoccupied territories. Part of the ministries were working on a remote basis, whether they were temporary or not. But one way or another, if there is an issue of registration arising and people are stubborn, they're going to make it one way or another. So I've suggested the second procedure. Well, because people were not able to get in touch with the ministry for 2 or 3 weeks. No one just was picking up the phone, and when we were talking to them personally, they were saying like we'll work remotely. So cases like that did happen. I hope that now things are changing, things are getting better, but I cannot be responsible for the activities of the government. Well, thank you for your answer. And the second question, in your opinion, what should motivate the foreign media to take decisions on registration? What are the benefits of such registration that they're getting? Because it kind of looks like for the time being they are not so restricted in their activities around Ukraine. So what do they get if they undergo this registration procedure from the legal point of view? Well, from the legal point of view, they get the representative offices. They get representative offices in Ukraine. So if you check out the websites of any big media, they show you where they are present, officially present, because you can like buy content from somebody who comes to Ukraine, somebody who is in the front lines, someone makes a footage from the front line, and they buy it from that person, and they kind of dub it and broadcast it. But I can imagine there could be such type of activity somewhere in Somalia or Afghanistan. But it all depends on when, for example, you're supposed to have. Yeah, exactly. You have to have the volume of production. When you have like 1 or 2 minutes per month, you can find a Ukrainian operator, a Ukrainian cameraman who makes a footage. But when you have some complex tasks, when you have Ukraine on your broadcast like every day, you have to have some stuff. You can calculate the number of people that you need, how many teams of people you need to go to the east, to the front lines, so you can get your product on at least weekly basis. So it takes some number of people. But if you're not represented officially, how are you going to rent an office? This is the first question, for example. Maybe it's going to be rented by a Ukrainian citizen. For example, they may rent a 3 rooms apartment of a room in a hotel, and then how are you going to hand over the money all the time? We're living in an open world. Ukraine complies with the global requirements on financial monitoring and compliance. So if you're a fixer, if you're a professional fixer, you can exercise this activity for foreign media, and you can calculate it yourself. What are the amounts necessary for payment of salaries, payment for equipment, even for operation of the vehicles, even without buying it, but just fueling it and driving it? And for example, renting the premises. Look at the media. They sit in 5-star hotels now. How much is it gonna cost to rent a room in a 5 stars hotel for a month? So are you going to carry the cash in your suitcase, or are you going to get the money to your card? Like 30, even 1,000 hryvnias, like 38,000, or like $10,000, 380,000 hryvnias on a monthly basis. That falls under compliance, and well, you can work like a month like this, and then there will be questions to you from the, say, from the tax agencies, from the banks. You can work as a private entrepreneur, but you will have to have all your proceeds text again, but it's a risky activity. Everything related to journalists, fixers, cameramen, everybody who goes on business trips like this. It's about insurance, it's about the leaves. For example, if you work, we pay you, and then you don't work, we don't pay you, that's one thing. But again, those are the relations that throw us back to the 19th century. So if we look at the way the media works, well, they don't work like this all around the world anymore. The media employees, they get social guarantees, they get all the benefits, and thus it all pushes us to the matter of legalization. This is what I can call this way. Oleg mentioned it properly, depending on the volume. If it's short and small, this is exactly what I'm saying. Now big media players make sense out of it. As a fixers, you may have seen it. There were bloggers coming who wanted to walk across the minefields. Well, they took one walk, and it's kind of costly, but that's sufficient for one of their reports. But if it's a big media that needs the high quality product coming all the time, you have to choose. These are the ways. Well, information agencies may also conduct surveys and monitorings, and doing it with a limited amount of staff, well, it's almost impossible. You cannot ensure the uninterrupted process of surveys and monitorings. This information may be interesting to investors, after all, interesting to those who help Ukraine, I know, politically or in the humanitarian or social field. This is why I'm not only talking about this content. Well, those are all the components of content, because what you've mentioned, those are all the dimensions of the socially measurable work that is transformed into the new media product. According to the new legislation, we don't have information agencies, by the way. We have this area of activity, right? But my legal background is urging me to inform you on the update of the legislation. So there are any big media, they have analytic departments that work there. They produce broadcasts, articles, everything. And if you see some discrepancy, you can start digging and investigating somewhere. Yes, you're absolutely correct. Well, friends, then I would like to thank you for your presence, for your interest. Thank you for coming. If you come up with any additional questions, please convey them to me through Media Center, because this type of activity, it raises questions. And I would like to wish you all a good day. Thank you.
You're not registered on Ministry of Economy?
Not yet. We are consulting still. Yeah.
Exactly, I was the voice of
Ну, це мультимедійна платформа. І вона розрахована на культурну спільну, за кордоном. Надавати чи актуальні події, такі, на культурні, це зовсім чудово було. Ну, натискаєш, і там є анонси культурних подій, наприклад. Чи, ну, просто на сайті Укрінформа, ну, ті, хто нас дивляться там за кордоном, наприклад, вони могли теж приєднувати до цих трансляцій. І також ми виробляємо деякі програми, якщо потрібно, ми можемо їм якось так поділитися. Це по-перше, а по-друге, ми можемо робити круглі столі. У нас є главний, ну, тобто в Тернополі у нас студія збирається. Дивіться, я свого часу, ну, ви знаєте, що таке канал інтро, ну, цей хобі, тобто я розумію, що